We're now starting lesson number 2, using hierarchies. In this lesson, we're going to look at implementing leveled hierarchies, parent-child hierarchies, also called recursive hierarchies, and also creating attributes based on hierarchies. This is an example of a time-based hierarchy. In the background, there are database views and a query is generated whose result is the basis of the hierarchy tree graph. There are two types of hierarchies in SAP HANA, leveled and recursive. The recursive, also called the parent-child hierarchy, is defined as pairs of predecessor and successor node IDs. Therefore, you would need a node ID and a parent node ID type of information in your existing data before you build the hierarchy. So let's look at an example over here. This is an example of a hierarchy, and there's a note over here in red which says that hierarchies in HANA can only be used by MDX connectivity. So any reporting tools that support MDX connectivity can use these hierarchy views. At the moment it's Excel, but that might change in the future with more developments taking place. So let's look at this example, shall we? So right on top we have the root node A1, which you can see over here in the table, the query node name, and this does not have any parents. However, it does have the children B1 and B2. And if I look at another one, for example C3 over here, then C3 does have a parent which is B2 and D1 and D2 as children. And you can also see the different levels over here. So level 00 is the root node, and this is level 1, level 2, and level 3. So let's look at level hierarchies first of all. Level hierarchies are fixed, so the root and child nodes can only be accessed in a defined order. For example, organizational structure, which is very rigid in nature. So how do we create a level hierarchy? Well, we can follow these steps over here. We can either use SQL, which they've shown you over here on this slide, or we can use the user interface. So it's going to take you through the steps of creating the hierarchy. So first of all, we're going to create a package. Within the package, I'll create an attribute view, select the table that you need, and then add your attributes. So once you've got your attributes over here, then I can right click on this hierarchies folder and create a new level hierarchy and simply add the different attributes over here in the right order. Now parent-child hierarchies are different because these are recursive hierarchies, and I'll give you a good example. So you could have like a manager and employee relationship parent-child hierarchy over here. So one thing to remember is that if you want to use a parent-child hierarchy, then the child attribute is defined by this principal key. So you need to set this as true. So this is how you create a parent-child hierarchy. Just right-click and simply add your attributes, and then specify your parent attribute. You don't need to define the child attribute because you've already done that by specifying the principal key of the table. One other thing that I would like to mention here is that there's an option called hierarchy active is false or true. Make sure this is true, because otherwise you will not see the non-key attributes in Excel. So you will only see the key attributes if it's false. So that's something that needs to be done. Before we finish the hierarchies lesson, what I would like to do is do a demonstration on how to create a hierarchy. Okay, so I'm back in SAP HANA Studio, and I'll start by creating a new attribute view. So just right click, create a new attribute view. I'll give it a proper name. Okay, so this is going to be my product hierarchy attribute. And just to save some time, I'm going to copy it from an existing attribute and make some changes. So if you remember, we created an attribute earlier, and I'm going to use that one here, the product attribute. Right, okay. So I'm going to remove any extra things that I don't need from here. For example, I'm going to remove the supplier GUID, which I don't need. And I'll go ahead and create a new level hierarchy. So this is where I can add my levels and the attributes on this side. So level 1, which is right on top, I'm selecting the type code. Level 2, category. Level 3, product ID. And on the right hand side you can see the level types over here. If you were creating a time hierarchy, then you would choose your time element from here, or if it's a calculated attribute, then you have to specify that it's actually a calculated attribute. In this case, it's a regular attribute that we have added, and I'll just click on OK and save and activate the attribute view. Now if you want to do a preview of what you've just created, the best thing is to create an analytic view and then have a look at that in Excel. So you can open the analytic view in Excel and display the hierarchy in there. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new analytic view. And I'll call this my product analytic view. So what I'm going to do here is instead of creating a brand new analytic view, I'm going to copy from an existing one just to save some time. So I've created one for sales orders, so I can use that. And if I go to the logical view, I'm just going to remove this one, delete this one here, and drag and drop the attribute view that I've just created, the level hierarchy attribute view. So I'm just going to connect the client to the client and also the node key to the product GUID. So far so good. I'll save and activate the analytic view. So that's completed successfully. And now I can open Excel and have a look at the data. Okay, good old Excel. So I'll go into data from other sources, from data connection wizard, other advanced, because this is where you have the SAP HANA MDX driver, SAP HANA MDX provider. Click on next, and this is where we need to specify our SAP HANA server. Instance is 01 in this case. My account. And test connection. Text connection succeeded. Click on OK and select the analytic view that we've just created, which is this one over here. Okay, and I'll go ahead and add my hierarchy, which is this one on the right hand side. And also I will add the items, some measures, and you can see it starts with a type code because that was our root node in the hierarchy, and I can expand this one over here. So I've got category, and you can expand. So yeah, this is I've expanded the category, and now I can see the product ID as well. So this is an example how to display a hierarchy, a leveled hierarchy. The next example is going to be the parent-child hierarchy. So I'll go ahead and do that as well. So I'll go back to the SAP HANA Studio, and I'll create a new attribute view. So this is for the parent-child hierarchy, which is the recursive hierarchy. So I've put PAC for parent-child. Okay, and I will start with copying from an existing attribute view, again to save some time. So I'll use the same one I used previously for the other example, which is my product attribute view. And I will remove the attributes which I no longer use in this case, which is the client, node key, and the supplier GUID. And I'll go ahead and create a parent-child hierarchy in this case. So the first thing I'm going to do is for the product ID, I'm going to set this as principal key. So it says principal key is true, which is there by default anyway, which is fine. So it's just a matter of checking, and I'll go ahead and create a new parent-child hierarchy. Give it an appropriate name. So because product ID's principal key was set to true anyway, so we don't have to specify that. However, we do need to specify the parent attribute. So in this case, it's the category parent attribute. So I'll click on OK and activate, save it first, and activate the new attribute view, which has the parent-child hierarchy. Okay, so we have finished the lesson on hierarchies, and in this lesson we talked about the leveled hierarchies, the parent-child hierarchies, and also how to create attribute-based hierarchies. The next lesson is about creating restricted and calculated measures. In this lesson, we're going to look at how to create restricted and calculated measures. So, what is a restricted measure? A restricted measure is a measure which is restricted by a value of an attribute. So let's say you want to see sales for the year 2011. So in that case, you can create a restricted measure with the measure sales and restrict it for the year 2011. So in this example that you can see on the slides, we have a table with country, month, and amount. If I just want to see US and Germany and the difference, then I can create a restricted measure and restrict it by the characteristic country for the values Germany and US, or you can do something for restriction by months, for example. So the functionality is similar to a restricted key figure that we have in BW, or a restricted measure in business objects. So in this example, if I just want to see the shipping cost, then I can run a query in business objects and just filter it by cost type, shipping cost. Or another option would be to create a restricted measure and add the shipping cost as the cost type in there. You can even do this at the analytic view level. So I've created a restricted measure called shipping cost, and you can see the measure is the amount and the cost type equals to the shipping cost. And you can see over here that you can use these operators for restrictions as well. So we have equal, greater than, less than, greater equal, less equal, is null, or is not null. So you can use these as well. And you can have more than one attribute to add your restrictions. You also have a choice of choosing the aggregation type. For example, it doesn't have to be a summation. You could also choose minimum or maximum. The next type of measure is the calculated measure, which is similar to a calculated key figure that you have in BW, for example. So you can create these calculated measures with your own formulas in there. So sometimes not all measures available in the base data will give your user sufficient information. So for that purpose, you can create your own custom or user-defined calculated measures. And they don't have to have very complex calculations. It could also be a simple calculated measure. Now, if you remember right in the beginning, when we were talking about best practices, we said that you want to reduce the amount of data that is being passed through the engines, the join engine, the OLAP engine, the calculation engine. So the recommendation is to avoid calculation before aggregation. So do the aggregation first and then do the calculation, so less data is being passed from one engine to another. So the recommended way of doing this is to do the calculation after we've done the aggregation. So here we're looking at an example of a calculated measure. So we've created an example, amount including VAT. So this is my gross amount multiplied by the VAT, as you can see here. Its data type is decimals, length is 13, the scaling of the decimal is 2. So this is an example of a calculated measure, and you can also use these functions on the right hand side. They are string functions as well. So sometimes when you sum everything up, it doesn't make sense. For example, in this case, you can see that under the total sales, which is units multiplied by price, it's not giving us the right values. So when measures are already aggregated, you will get the wrong values. In this case, price does not give us any meaningful value. So for this purpose, we can actually use the option calculate before aggregation. So there's an option over here right at the end. You can see there's a checkbox which is calculate before aggregation. So for these types of measures, you can predefine the calculated measure to calculate each individual item before aggregating. So then you get the right value at the bottom. So now I'm going to show you a demonstration of creating restricted and calculated measures. I'm back in SAP HANA Studio, and the scenario is that you are a consultant at a customer that sells electronics, and they have a requirement where they want to see individual measures to display total sales for their media products and their screen sales. So we have to create these restricted measures. Also, part of the requirement is that they want to see how the media and screen products stack up compared to the total sales. So you want to do the comparison between these product sales. So we want to have those as calculated measures. So we want to see percentages as well. So first of all, I'm going to create a new analytic view. So I'll just go over here, create a new analytic view. So this is my media and screen sales analysis. So in this case, we don't have to change the schema for currency conversion. We will cover that in the next lesson. So I'll leave this as default. So this is only used for currency conversions. So in the next screen, I'm going to add some tables so we can use that in this example. So we have some sales information. So I've got product and sales data. And I'm not adding any attribute views, so I can go ahead and finish this and then join the product table to the sales data table. So over here I've got my product ID. I'm going to connect this to product ID over here and just check my cardinality, which should be one to many, so that is fine. So training product ID, which is this one, connected to training sales data product ID. Okay, and this should be one to many. And also the join type is referential. So the next thing I'm going to do is create an attribute in this view. So I'm going to add the currency, which is the sales data currency, as an attribute. And product text as well. And for the product test, I'm going to make this hidden because I'm only going to use this for one purpose. So let's go ahead and create the required measure. So I'm going to add, first of all, I'm going to add the amount, which is the amount over here under sales data. So this should be added as a measure. And I'm going to change the name of this to total sales. Just makes it easier. So let me go ahead and create a new restricted measure for the screen sales. So I'll just right click on this one, create a new restricted measure, and I'll call this one my screen sales description, which is total sales for monitors and flat screens, and the measure we're talking about is the total sales, because we only have one, otherwise you will see more measures over here as well. So now I can add a restriction, and I'm restricting this by the product text equals to, and if I just click on find, it will give you all the options. The one we're restricting to in this case is the flat screen, so I've selected that, and just click on OK, and you should see on the right hand side we now have a restricted measure called flat screens. I would create another one over here for the media sales as well, so I'll create another restricted measure and call this my media sales. The same measure, just a different restriction this time. Product text is so in this case we're going to use the hard disk. So let me go ahead and select that option. You can see you don't have that in list option over here, so that's why I'm using the equal to sign, although I do want to add more than one, not just hard disk, but I also want to add SD disks over here as well. So hard disk first of all, and then I can add another restriction because it doesn't have an in list, and this time I will select the SD disk as well. Click OK, and we have a new restricted measure on the right hand side. Let's have a look at the results. So I will go ahead and save it first of all, and then activate my analytic view. It's this one that I need to activate. So that's all done. So I'll go ahead and do a data preview, and you can see it's showing us the media sales, the currency, screen sales, and the total sales. Remember, I had hidden away the product text because I was only using that for my restricted measures. So that's the first part of this demonstration, how to create a restricted measure. The next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a calculated measure, because we also want to see or compare the results and look at the percentages. So I'm going to create a calculated measure this time, and I'm going to call the first one the screen sales percentage. So screen sales share would be a better name. So we leave the aggregation as sum, and under the description I'll just put percentage, the percentage share for screen sales out of total sales, because that's what this is. And this is decimal, length is 2, so that's what we're using, and because we're going to be a percentage, scaling is 2, and this is where I can go ahead and add the expression. So on the right hand side you can see we have various functions: conversion, string functions, mathematical, date functions, but this one is a simple one. We're just dividing the screen sales by the total sales. So I'm going to select screen sales divided by the total sales, which is my measure. So in this case that's all I need for this one, and I will also create another calculated measure this time, and this is for the media sales percentage. So this is my media sales share, You can add a description over here as well. Decimal 2, scaling is 2, and this time it's just media sales divided by total sales. And that's my second calculated measure on the right hand side. So let's go and have a look at the results. So I'll save and activate. So that's all successful. Let's have a look at the results. And you can see the share of the screen sales and the media sales. And you can display the media share in a graph as well. So I've just added a filter on euros as the currency, and you can see the media and screen sales share. And that concludes the demonstration on how to create restricted and calculated measures. So this is the end of the lesson, and we've looked at why you might want a restricted measure, how to create one, and also looked at calculated measures. So now we're going to go to our next lesson. So now we're going to start lesson 4 using filter operations. And in this lesson we're going to look at constraint filters and the where clause. Also looking at how to create your client dependent views and how to model domain fixed values. That would be our next topic. So let's look at the first slide, which is filter operations using constraints and the where clause. As mentioned earlier in the course, one of the primary objectives of modeling here is to reduce the data transfer between the engines. So that can be achieved by using a filter, or you can use the where clause. You can also use client dependent views and model domain fixed values, which we're going to talk about later. So you want to avoid sending too much data to the client application for aggregation. So you can apply a constraint filter or use a where clause, but they are different. A constraint filter is applied directly on the table at design time, and this is faster than the where clause because the where clause is defined on runtime in the SQL query itself. For each of the models, you will see in the properties area there's two options over here, which is default client and default language. By default they're set. As you know, almost all tables in the ECC are client dependent. Only a few tables do not have client dependency. For example, printer configuration tables. The data for the attribute or analytics view is automatically filtered to the client, which is specified in the user property. So here at the bottom you can see we have a session client in the user's properties itself. Or another option is for each of the analytic views you can specify a default language and a default client. In calculation views you can also use the session underscore context operation. This slide is about model fixed values or domain fixed values. So domain fixed values are used for several fields. They are simple value lists with language dependent texts which are stored in the database tables DD07L, for example, or DD07T. So when you start a replication, there's a script which is executed that creates these two tables to be used for each domain. So only those domains are taken into account which are active. So if you want to use them, you can use the DD07L table, which will have the list of tables over here, and the DD07T, which is the texts. So you can create a join between the first and the text table, just like shown over here, and then include one field as the key field in the output structure, and then the text field as description mapping. Domain fixed values are created separately for ECC and for CRM. Currently, this is done by a set of SQL statements that need to be executed via the SQL editor. So I will now show you a demonstration of how to add these filters. Okay, so I'm back in SAP HANA Studio. I'm just going to close these other tabs on top. I'm just going to close them up. And I'm going to use one of my analytic views to show you a demonstration of filter operations. So I'll use this one here. So this is the one I created earlier. And if I click on this white space over here, you can see the properties actually changes at the bottom. Or maybe if I click on the table, you can see it's showing me the properties of the table. So it depends on what I click on. And if I click on the join, then it changes to the join properties. So I want to see the properties of my analytic view, so I need to click in this white space, and you can see there are two options: default client and default language. So if I set this to, let's say, 200, for example, okay, it's going to filter out the 200 client from my data. So at the moment, all my data is from client 800. So if I just save this and activate my analytic view and do a data preview, I'm not expecting to see any data over here because of the client 200, which I've set on the analytic view. So if I go back again and change it to 800, save, and save, activate the analytic view and do a data preview again. This time we should see all the data because we have client 800 data in this analytic view. The other thing that I can do is I've already done this actually, where I had a measure like gross amount, and I've just changed the name to gross amount US dollars. So I click on the key figure or the measure, and here I can change it to amount with currency instead of simple. More on this later on when we do currency conversions. Right now I've just fixed a currency which is US dollars for this one over here. So when I do a preview, it always shows me that one currency code. If you want to apply a filter, so let's say I go into the data foundation, and I'm going to apply a filter on the currency code, which is this one here. So I can right click on this one and apply a filter, or I could apply a filter on the purchase order ID. So if I go ahead and apply the filter, so this is equal to, so let's say this is 037. Now I know that I do not have any purchase order with this number, so we will not be able to see the data. You can see it's added the filter. This is the constraint that I was talking about earlier that I've added. And if I just save this and activate the analytic view and try to preview this, I will not get any data back. Okay, but if I go back in there and change it for one that already exists, so I just have to right click and edit the filter. I'll just put a 1 at the end because I know that one definitely exists. So save and activate And let's do another data preview. So this time we should see the data for that purchase order. So in this case we have a customer which is Maria Brown, and and then it's showing us the different amounts in US dollars and the categories that she has purchased, also the products over here as well. Okay, so that's just how to add constraint filters directly on the data foundation